May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. A personal vendetta turned combative confinement. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about the defendant, an overzealous security guard anxious to utilize the little bit of power bestowed upon him by his department store uniform to viciously harass and confine an innocent man whose only crime was dating the defendant's daughter. Now, you have learned all about that innocent man, Richard Oken, here today. It's been a while since Vore Dyer, so allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Meagan McNeil, and I have had the pleasure of representing Richard Oken in this case. Since it has been established that Richard Oken's detainment met the first two elements of false imprisonment, today we only aim to show that that detainment was completely and utterly without the authority of law. Now, to establish this, we must prove three things to you today. First, we must prove that the defendant, Vince Vaughn, had no belief greater than mere naked suspicion to detain Richard Oken. Second, we must prove to you that the manner by which Vince Vaughn detained Richard Oken went far beyond reasonable, even going as far as to constitute assault. And third, we must prove to you that the duration for which Vince Vaughn detained Richard Oken was completely unreasonable. Now, we must prove these things to you today by a preponderance of the evidence. All that means is that it's more likely than not, more true than not true, that our claim has merit. Think of it as the scales of justice tipping in our favor, even if by the weight of a feather. And I believe we have proven those things to you here today. Today you have heard all about a personal vendetta stemming from Richard Oken's innocent relationship with Vince Vaughn's daughter that caused Vince Vaughn to stalk Richard Oken at Bell Department that day, viciously harass him, confine him against his will. Let's take a look at the evidence you've heard. The evidence you've heard today proves that Richard Oken was confined unlawfully and without reasonable belief, manner, or duration. First, let's talk a little bit about Vaughn and Richard's relationship. Now, Vaughn was familiar with Richard because Richard dated Vaughn's daughter. And as many young couples do, the love fizzled out. Vaughn began to hear rumor after rumor after rumor from his daughter about Richard. And naturally, this would put a distaste in any father's mouth, but Vaughn let it go too far when he decided to stalk Richard around Bell Department Store when Richard was simply there to buy some running shoes. A trip that he thought should be so short, he felt comfortable leaving his dog in his vehicle. Now, as soon as Richard stepped inside Bell Department Store, Vaughn's eyes were on him. Vaughn watched Richard walk over to the running shoes, pick out a pair, and seemingly go to the counter to make his purchase. After Richard stepped away from the counter, Vaughn continued to stare him down as he stopped at a counter near the exit to mull over a sunglass purchase. Now, as Richard was looking at the sunglasses, he was shuffling a little bit, and sure, he might have been looking around, seemingly worried that someone was watching him. But let us remind you that somebody had been watching Richard from the second he stepped into that store. I'm sure we've all occasionally dealt with that uncomfortable feeling that someone's watching you, but for Richard Oken, that day in Bell Department Store, that was his reality. Now, once Richard decided that he wasn't going to purchase the sunglasses, he fiddled with his bags and headed towards the exit. As Richard crossed the threshold, the alarm sounded, and it was in that moment that Vince Vaughn knew it was his chance to pounce. Vaughn rushed over to the exit, grabbed Richard by the arm, drug him across the department store in front of all the other patrons, all while screaming at him that he was a piece of junk and a no-good thief. Once Vaughn got Richard back into the break room, he shoved his face against the wall, shoved him face down onto the ground, and then proceeded to put all his weight on top of this scrawny 21-year-old boy, even though Richard was pleading that he was in pain. Amidst Richard's desperate pleas, Vaughn showed absolutely no mercy, and instead used his class ring to thump Richard on the back of the head. Vaughn then continued to verbally berate Richard. Even though Richard contested that he had not stolen anything, he was in an immense amount of pain, and his poor dog was sitting out in the heat. Once Vaughn finally got around to emptying the contents of Richard's bag, he quickly noticed that the only things in the bag were a pair of athletic socks, Richard's old scratched up sunglasses, and the running shoes with the security tag still on them. Itching to still punish Richard, Vaughn decided he would go to the front of the store to ask the sales clerk if she had indeed sold the shoes to Richard. In doing so, he left Richard in the break room, pounding on the door and pleading to please be let go so he could go check on his beloved dog. 10 minutes pass as Vaughn moseys around the store looking for the sales clerk. Once he eventually finds her, she quickly corrects him and assures him that, indeed, Richard did purchase the running shoes and was not a thief. Now, at this point, instead of rushing back to the break room to free the innocent Richard Oken and apologize, Vaughn decides to sit outside for a 7-minute smoke break. 7 minutes that proved to be fatal for Richard's beloved pet. After he's finished with his love smoke break, Vaughn decides to mosey back over to the break room, wherein he finally lets Richard go, but not without getting one last punch in by telling him to get the hell out of the store and never come back. At this point, an innocent Richard Oken walks out of the store to find his beloved childhood pet in the car dying of a heat stroke. Members of the jury, you are the judge of the facts in this case. It is your decision if a vicious Vince Vaughn goes unpunished for his actions. For Richard Oken, a boy who only wanted some new running shoes, this day turned into complete humiliation, embarrassment, pain, and the death of his best friend, all because Vince Vaughn refused to let his personal vendetta go. Thank you.